Great. Good evening from Piraeus, Greece, and you are very welcome at the Institute of Philosophy and Technology and our new IPT talk series of the new academic year 2025-2026. We open our very first IPT talk with a good friend, Denitza from Bulgaria, and not only a good friend, but also an eminent scholar from the New Bulgarian University. She's an associate professor of law and with specialization in theory and philosophy of law and information society and law. And actually she was a visiting professor, a visiting researcher also at the University of Notre Dame with the Fulbright scholarship in Paris, in Lyon, and in other occasions. And we are very proud, glad, and happy to have her with us opening this lecture series. And the topic is from Kant to cyberlibertarianism and how we can define the evolution of digital regulation. And the momentum is great because we just last year celebrated the 300 years of birth of Immanuel Kant. It's a very important philosopher and scholar and actually defining our modern conception of deontological ethics, but also a momentum for the digital world where the AI Act recently and other data regulations around the world experience this intersection, this confluence, if I can say, between morality and legal aspects, soft law or hard ethics, if you like, in this case, especially in the area of AI ethics and philosophy. And also from a philosophical perspective, but I understand also from the legal aspect, how the concept of freedom from a philosophical or a legal perspective could actually enlighten us. And we know as philosophers that freedom and morality and ethics are very closely related. So Denitza, you are very welcome. The stage is yours. We are looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yanis. Thank you so much for your invitation and for giving me the floor to speak in front of your colleagues. Thank you so much for organizing all the talk and to your team as well that were so helping and supporting everything. So I started working on the regulation on digital environment, and I was very interested on how the philosophical perspectives in fact define the different regulatory approaches. So I made my research in Europe, but also in the United States, and I tried to make a logical conclusion on the reasons that actually make these approaches different, and also not to find only the content difference of the regulatory approaches, but also the reasons why these approaches differ. In order to present my speech today in front of you, I would like to start very briefly with some statistics saying that 67% and more of the population worldwide have access to internet at the moment, and also that more than 63% of the worldwide population has access to social media. And from this statistical data, I would like to focus on some aspects of the development of the digital society at the moment that makes this moment quite significant. From one side, there is an increasing variety of online services provided already not only by private companies, but also we have a lot of services provided in the frames of the so-called e-government, and they include not only taxation, but also healthcare services and public procurement, and so many procedures that include in fact, the interaction between state and citizens. On the other side, we have a growing role of social media platforms in shaping public opinion and influencing democratic processes. And in the end, it's not possible to mention that we have a very rapid development of artificial intelligence that from one side supports the use of digital environment, and it's very helpful, but on the other side, it amplifies the risks in this environment. All these issues provoke strong debates on democracy and human rights in the digital environment. So the question is how to balance the individual rights, for example, access to information, free expression, privacy, with corporate economic interests, and then the interest of the state to ensure security to the population, to its citizens. Tensions currently are intensifying between the EU proactive digital regulation and the technological companies supported by EU policy. And also there is another factor, and these are the states that increasingly more and more often talk about establishing their digital sovereignty. So how can we react to all these problems or to all these challenges? I would like to look back in the process of developing the internet and digital environment, and then to relate it to the philosophical perspectives. Then I want to look into the EU regulatory approach and to relate it, to connect it with the Kantian philosophy. And finally, I would like to give some examples of governance and to talk very briefly about the DCA, the Digital Services Act, and compare it with the self-regulatory approach of regulation, and give an example of Meta Oversight Board. So if we look back in the creation or the development of internet, we would say that it was developed in the 1980s with a unique design. And in fact, this design was a result of the prevailing political and economic culture in the US. The ideas of cyberlibertarianism, in fact, influenced to a great extent the characteristics that were embedded in the internet network. Digital space, or as it is called, cyberspace in the United States, was seen as independent domain, analogous to the digital world, but it was seen as possessing its own sovereignty, different from the sovereignty of the states. And so the cyber libertarians, in fact, justified the idea, or they supported the idea in the beginning, that legal regulation does not apply in the cyberspace. What are the technological characteristics of internet that are defining the digital space? First, it's the decentralization of the network, the relatively low costs of building this network, so it gives the possibility of the network to expand very briefly. The multi-layered open architecture that is based on the principle of end-to-end design. Since the creation of the digital environment that is based on internet, in fact, there were strong expectations for economic and social transformation that will create a global culture of individual freedom and environment. The culture or the philosophy of cyber libertarians, in fact, was based on the libertarian philosophy. The libertarian philosophy with the main ideas of personal autonomy, individual freedoms, market economy with minimal government intervention. That's why cyber libertarians, considering the digital state, the digital environment, or the cyberspace, They opposed to the establishment of legal regulation in cyberspace, and they thought that it is not possible because of the technological design, the technological characteristics of the network. They were opposing this regulation, legal regulation, including the possibility to legally regulate the technological design or to provide targeted funding from the states in order to support one or another choice for the design of the network. They thought that digital space should be governed by social conventions that are created outside of nation states, based on new social contract founded on ethics, individual interest, and common will. Key values that were promoted included freedom of expression and universal access, as well as economic freedom driven by innovation. Of course, if we just want to mention the most prominent documents of this cyber-libertarian philosophy, we have to mention the Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace that was written in 1966 by John Perry Barlow, and he thought that there should be a reliable digital network available to everyone with no restrictions on content and policies which promote information entrepreneurship. And also the core values of freedom of expression of beliefs should be affirmed in the digital space, regardless of the legal regulations and restrictions in the offline world, as well as the principle of universal access to information with no discrimination based on race, economic power, military strength, or origin. And another document that I would like to mention, explaining or defining the cyber-libertarian view of what the digital space or cyberspace should be, is the Magna Carta for the Knowledge, or the American Cyberspace and the American Dream, that was first published in 1994. And they define there the cyberspace as a new bioelectronic environment inhabited by knowledge, which will radically transform society. And then we are going to enter the age of knowledge, or the third wave in social evolution. As a universal bioelectronic ecosystem, they can exist everywhere. Cyberspace enables users to create, share, and expand knowledge with an exceptional speed. So cyber-libertarians, they thought that there should be a definition of the basic concepts as property, innovation, and freedom. They thought that cyberspace will not be possible to be managed centralized from a centralized bureaucracy because the society is going to be too complex. Governance should be emphasized, should emphasize demassification, individualization, and freedom. This cyberspace will host diverse private communities, forming the basis for a freer and more diverse society. The last cyber-libertarian views of freedom that is outside the state regulation was actually reflected in the real model for internet governance that appeared during the process of development and the expansion of the internet network. Until 1980s, the development of the internet was limited to academia sector and public institutions in the US, after which the network began rapidly opening up to private commercial organizations and society at large. The complex and multi-layered process of developing and establishing mechanisms for the coordinated management of the global network, in fact, was very long and quite difficult. The term that appeared to be used and actually was used for this management process of the network was internet governance, opposing to the more narrow term government that was focusing on public regulation developed by the state. When the term governance or internet governance was used, it reflected a broader concept of regulation that included not only public regulation coming from the state, but also the private regulation coming from different private organizations and other stakeholders. It's also worth mentioning that for the management of Internet and for the governance of Internet, a new model of taking decisions was elaborated. In fact, in difference with the intergovernmental approach in taking decisions, a new multi-stakeholder approach has been developed. When the decisions in international environment are made through the intergovernmental process, then the different states or representatives of the states are voting in order to reach a decision. In the multi-stakeholder approach, the decisions are taken with rough consensus or with consensus. And also, what is very specific is that the representatives of states are in fact just one of the participants in the process of taking decisions. And their votes have equal value with the votes of the technical community, of the academia, civil sector society, and private companies. What is considered to be a very great achievement of the development of the structure of the internet governance models is the definition of internet governance that was adopted in 2025, saying that the internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. What is specific here and what is important here is that we can find the reflection of the multi-stakeholder approach in taking the decisions, when the representatives of the states participate in an equal level with the participants of the other stakeholders of the digital society, of the digital world. I mean the technical community, the academia, the civil society, and the private companies. After 1991, internet was open for commercial use. And on the basis of their legal culture and political and philosophical tradition, US government decided that they're going to embrace a very light touch regulatory model, which facilitated the emergence of a bottom-up, self-regulating technical community that in fact played a foundational role in shaping the internet's institutional and normative architecture. So through this structure or through this model of creating internet governance model, a highly dynamic and decentralized network of actors, procedures, and institutions was in fact included in the process of governing the network or the digital environment. In fact, it's a very difficult task to specify or to make a systemic review of all the institutions or structures that are participating in the internet governance. ICANN organization provides one model that in fact divides the governance structures into three layers: for the infrastructure layer, for the logical layer, and for the economic and social layer. And according to this model, the infrastructure layer is regulated with the participation of national authorities, private operators, and the technical community. The logical layer, domain names or IP addresses and so on, is mainly expert-driven multi-stakeholder frameworks. The economic and social layers mainly is defined by the states, intergovernmental organizations, private companies, and social and civil society. And in the end, I have listed the main organizations that are, in fact, shaping the policy and making the coordination between the various governance activities. The theory of regulation and the philosophy of regulation did not stop with cyber-libertarians, because it was seen very soon that the digital space or the cyberspace, it will be very difficult to be regulated without the intervention of the state regulation, with the state legislation. That's why we have I have listed here on the slide some main some main philosophical thoughts, some main philosophical schools in the development of the legal theory in the field of digital regulation. We have cyber anarchists versus cyber realists, and then a new thought appeared. It was the so-called techno-determinism. And they focused on the unique role of the technological architecture, defining it as a separate normative level alongside laws, social norms, and markets. And it was called even Lex Informatica. When defining this specific layer for the cyberspace, it was very important that the specifics of the technical regulation or the Lex Informatica were defined in comparison with the legal regulation. So the law, the specifics was that it was very slow in order to regulate the fast evolving technology. And also it was very much related with the modern state that was defined by the territory, by the physical territory, versus the technological architecture that was defining the technological rules, or this Lex Informatica. But the problem with the Lex Informatica was the lack of transparency, and also the problem that it was reflecting the private interests of the companies that were creating this architecture, and not reflecting and not necessarily reflecting the public consensus of the society. The new theories related to the digital space are the theory of network communitarism. And in this theory, the idea is that there are we are communicating in the digital space, and it makes it makes it for the states quite difficult to impose national legal regulations. And moreover, because we are in the digital space, we can choose in the case of conflict of laws, which national law to apply. And also, of course, it's one of the ideas that is used a lot for the development of the legal regulation and for defining the theory about this, is the theory of Habermas, of the communication theory of Habermas, that in fact thought that because digital space gives us the opportunity to communicate more efficiently and more openly, this makes it for the individuals possible to influence the decisions of the political authorities more efficiently. What are the consequences about this? The concept of freedom in the digital environment is in fact linked to the limitations of the state regulation and coercion due to the current design of the network. Individual empowerment results from the ability to connect in the communities where they can exercise their freedom of expression and access to information. And as a result, individuals can have a tangible impact on political processes and decisions. In the beginning, the European Union followed and participated in all these activities related to the development of the digital space or the cyberspace, and in fact was very much following the ideas that came from the United States about the types of regulation that the digital space requires. However, as risks such as disinformation, privacy violations, cybercrime, and market concentrations began to emerge, the EU adopted its own approach, shaped by its political, philosophical, and legal traditions. Political and legal culture in Europe has been particularly influenced by Kantian philosophy, including his understanding of freedom, the state, and the law. I will very shortly, very briefly mention just his main perspective of how freedom, law, and state are interconnected. Kant formulated the concept of law as a set of all conditions under which the will of one individual can be compatible with the will of another in accordance with the universal or eternal law of freedom. The external actions of each person can only be such that their free exercise can coexist and not violate the freedom of any other person. The state has the duty to guarantee the freedom of each individual within the limits in which it coexists with the freedom of the other citizens. So if we make conclusions about this regarding the digital space, we should say that Kant philosophy legitimizes the existence of state and law as mechanisms to guarantee and protect individual freedom, and in the sense that they are both necessary and desirable, in difference with the cyber-libertarians that actually opposed to the intervention of the state and legal regulation. In the 19th and 20th centuries, his views were further developed not only within the context of the evolution of legal philosophy, but also within the framework of the legal positivism and the concept of the rule of law, or l'état du droit, the one that we have usually in Europe, and the one that we say the state of law. I have to mention that in the 20th century, after the Second World War, this concept of the rule of law or the state of law has been broadened to include also the human rights perspective that were included in the international treaties. In the 21st century, the concept of freedom in the European legal philosophy remained closely linked to law and the state as a guarantor of individual rights, with freedom existing within the framework of state regulation and legal rules, reflecting a social consensus that balances competing interests. Very soon after the problems and the first risks started to appear in the digital environment, the big international organizations, United Nations, Council of Europe, and also the European Union, they have agreed that the human rights, as they are listed and as they are included in the international treaties, that they should be guaranteed not only in the offline environment, but also in the online environment. And it seems that here, in these human rights perspectives, the two visions, the European one coming from and closely related to the Kantian philosophy of law, and the cyber-libertarian on which the development of internet was based, they can find their intersection point. However, there is a difficulty because these human rights are formulated in a very abstract way in order to reach worldwide consensus. And also, because of their very abstract formulation, they can be implemented in the different territories in a different way, because they are going to be interpreted in a different way. And also there is another perspective, another difficulty, that the legal systems, they have their specifics. For example, the US system, the common law systems, they are based on the legal precedent, while the continental legal system that is predominant in Europe is based on the abstract regulation. So the system in the United States as a common law system, it was possible to be reactive. After the problem appears, the courts can solve this problem, while the European courts were not possible to react in this way. That's why the Europe decided that they are going to work proactively, adopting a legislation that will regulate the digital space. So sometimes when we talk in the United States or with experts, not only experts, but with colleagues from Europe and the United States, for the Europeans, it is difficult to understand how it is possible to give so much freedom to private companies to decide what is going to happen in the digital field. But for the Americans on the other side, it's quite difficult to understand how it is possible for the Europeans to allow the states to intervene so deeply in the relations that are developing in the digital field. And so I just would like to give very briefly to give two examples. One is a self-regulatory model that was created in the United States, and one is from the European regulation, the Digital Services Act, that is in fact a representation of the European approach to regulate the digital society. The American legislation or the American law allowed the social media platforms to develop their own community standards and to apply these community standards in order to balance the different interests of their users. I must say that at the moment, Facebook community standards are the same for 8, and they are translated in more than 80 languages. The platforms has written or has stated on their document that they're applying the same rules to all the users that are using the network. It is quite it is an amazing, by the way, task that was almost impossible for the legal regulation when it is framed by the state regulation to create the same law for so many users coming from so many cultures. In 2018 was established the Meta Oversight Board to decide the most difficult and the most controversial cases that appeared over the platform. In their activities, you can find an example how, in fact, the private regulation can resist the state regulation. When they're making their decision, the Meta Oversight Board says that they're following the UN guidelines for the implementation of human rights. And if a decision that they're taking and when they are deciding a specific case, if there is a decision that contradicts the legislation of a specific country but does not conflict with the platform policies, the content is removed in the country, while in the country where this content is contradicting, while remaining in the remaining platform, it is accessible. And I will give you an example about this. For example, on 13 May, There was a request received by Meta Framework, they received a blocking access decision regarding 110 items containing videos and audios of a person from Turkey making allegations of various crimes and corruption by the government. The items were reported under Article 8 of Turkish law, and then the court decided that this content should be deleted from the network. This request coming from a state was considered by the platform, and their decision was that the reported items did not violate Facebook community standards. So they restricted access to the content in Turkey for violating local law and notified the impacted users. But on the other hand, they left this content remained accessible for all the other users of the network, for which this content does not contradict to local laws. And then, why this issue is important? Because with the DCA, the European Union created a DCA transparency database where all the platforms are required to send information about the content moderation process that they are doing. So at the moment, more than 10 billion cases of content moderation procedures have been reported to this platform. And what is reported that that more than 50% of these cases, well, the decisions were taken by fully automated decisions. These decisions are made by fully automated means, by artificial intelligence and the platform. So it's quite significant when we see this information and when we see that, in fact, a lot of our talk, a lot of our exchange of information over the social media is in fact moderated by the platforms, and it was seen as important by the European Union to intervene. So the Digital Services Act was adopted. It is a regulation that is directly applicable on the territory of all the European member states. And with this regulation, it was required all the member states to designate a national digital services coordinators that are going to exercise general oversight over the content moderation process exercised by the platforms. So in this way, the European Union wanted to bring also the public protection or the benefits of the legal regulation in order to guarantee or to support the European users of the social platforms. This process is followed also with other regulatory acts as GDPR, Digital Markets Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, the European Media Freedom Act, and the Regulation on Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising. The EU regulatory approach has been criticized a lot for its complexity, reaching the level of over-regulation, which raises concerns about the potential to censor minority viewpoints and to restrict innovation in the sector. I must say that we still don't have a full and efficient implementation of these regulations. But what I see as very positive is that currently the EU launched a procedure for simplification of the digital regulation. I think it's quite important because EU regulations cannot be effective without being seen as a part of the complex, multi-layered internet governance model that in fact does not allow a specific organization or specific state to regulate the digital environment. Well, just brief conclusions. At the moment, we have a global network with freedom of expression and access to information, and I believe it's widely established, at least in Europe, and it supports individuals in their economic, political, and social activities. However, the global society is not homogeneous, but culturally determined. In this society, the significance of national borders and states is less prominent compared to the physical world. So the question is, are we going to keep our freedom in the views, in the way the cyber-libertarians view it since the very beginning? Or we're going to allow the states to have more power over the regulation of power activities over the internet? Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Denitza, for this very interesting presentation. And it shows really how the different the ontology of this digital environment, the digital space, and the complexity of the relationships between the human beings and the cultural determinations that you mentioned, especially between comparing the European Union and the States, shows this difference and the dynamics between a legal philosophy on the one hand and also an ethical philosophy that really roots in our modern world with the Kantian revolution. But I would like to give the word to the audience and some questions. We have some time. We have 10 minutes for some Q&A. You are very welcome to ask any question that you wish. You can raise your hand in this case. Okay, I would like to start asking a question, in this case, Denitza. You mentioned this difference between positive and negative regulation. And this negative aspect in terms of regulation seems to be related to the states, and also the European one has a more positive aspect. Do you think that somehow these two can be balanced? Because there is also this distinction between positive freedom, as you describe it also in regulation, and negative freedom, as can be actually realized in some more American philosophy theorists. So do you think that the future is going to bring some balance between a positive regulation system in legal terms with the negative one, which has a more libertarian aspect?
I think you're absolutely right, Yanis. The perspective on human rights coming from the United States is more for human rights as freedoms and the negative obligations of the states. The state is obliged not to intervene in the freedoms, but in the individual freedoms. But the European approach is different, and we see the positive obligations of the state to guarantee the rights and freedoms of the individuals. I think the good thing is that, in fact, we don't have any controversy on the basis of values. My perspective is that we have differences on the level of legal systems and on the level of the of the functioning of the legal systems. I don't think that we should have unification. And to be honest, I would like to see if the European approach will be effective. Because what we see now with the GDPR, I'm not sure, and nobody is very sure that it's very efficient. Let's see if this approach will be efficient with the Digital Services Act. I think it is a more clear example of how the European Union wants to bring the positive perspective of legal regulation, the helpful perspective of legal regulation, and to support the individual freedom. I think that the dynamics is really is really fast, and I think that we should be really careful in this process of giving too much power to the states and to the public institutions to intervene in our relations over the internet.
Very, very interesting what you said, and it's really a difficult moment, and it's the time that conversations but also decisions must be made, and the decisions are really complicated based on complicated factors. There is already, that's the positive thing, there is already a conversation about that. So there are some questions from Aris. Ari?
Oh, hello, thank you for the very nice presentation. I have a question circling back to Kant. So at Kant's time, when he talked about the state, really the state was, I don't know if this word stakeholder is correct here, but it was a primary force during Kant's time. Now in today's time, all these corporations, for example, they can play a much larger role and have a much greater power than, I guess, any other such entity at Kant's time. So what Kant could theorize at the time. So my question is essentially, could the idea of, as Kant presented, the state being a regulatory for not excess freedom of individual, be passed on to another entity, such as a corporation or another entity, I don't know, maybe not necessarily corporation for profit, but maybe a non-government organization or something like that?
Thank you. It's a great question. In fact, when in the beginning, cyber-libertarians were really very influential over the development and over the creation of cyberspace. But in the beginning of the 21st century, when all these technological companies started to appear as very strong corporations and also as monopolists, they in fact they said that it was a mistake not to have some competition regulation, because now it's extremely difficult to have new actors on some specific markets. I must say that for many years, the European Union wanted to support the development of European platforms, but for many reasons, funding, and also maybe some researchers mentioned the different national languages, it turned out to be impossible. So how to find the balance between these private corporations and the states? And now we see in the case of the United States how the states, in fact, the state could interact and could collaborate with the very big technological platforms. It's a great question, by the way. And for the European Union, for us, the question is how to support and how to continue with the regulation that is going to be proactive and that is going to support the European understanding of human rights, and in the same way not to stop innovation because of the excessive administrative burden.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denitza. There is also a question from Christina. Christina?
Good evening. Thank you so much, first of all, Denitza, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And you already touched the topic about Europe being more flexible in regulation already, having in mind that it doesn't need to stop innovation in this AI race, etc. And for me, it's really interesting to know your opinion on what is the path forward for Europe.
The path forward, first it's absolutely necessary to keep Europe and European Union and to keep Europe together, because I don't really believe in these national separatist ideas. And I don't think that the national states will support in a better way the individual and human perspective than this, let's say, international or supranational organization that is the European Union. The path forward is to find a way to combine innovation and also with securing privacy, because as, for example, we see it in Bulgaria, we have a very fast developing process of creating public services online, or this e-government process. And at the same time, we have extremely ineffective implementation of GDPR. We don't have a real implementation of protection of the right to privacy of individuals. So for me, it seems like this balance between going too fast further in the development of the digital services online, and on the other side of not protecting individuals from the digital risks.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really interesting, and I really agree with you in this direction in terms of regulation. I think that we are almost running out of time. And I don't know if there is any other question at this moment. I think we can close. I want deeply to thank Denitza for this rich and solid presentation about a very complicated topic, especially as the things run very fast in terms of technology and the way that we want to regulate this technology, and to what extent we want to regulate this technology, and how to regulate specific technologies that demand not only our legal mindsets, but also our ethical understanding of human relations in the digital space. So thank you again, Denitza, for this presentation. Thank you very much for opening our IPT Talk series this year.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, Yanis.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Good night from Piraeus. Bye.
Thank you. Good night from Sofia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.